listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian, the show where we ask a comedian to come in and share an issue of pain for them while a therapist tries to help out and offer some insight. At some point in your life, you may have found yourself in a toxic relationship, one that drains you, saps your confidence, or lowers your self-esteem. Dave Eastgate is a comedian with experience of this, and he's also joined now by psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. Hello to you both.
Hi, Ashwin. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Ashwin.
You're welcome. Dave, can you tell us about the toxic relationship that you ended up in?
We knew each other in high school. She was the popular girl at school, and I guess I was the class clown and whatever. And she became an actress and a writer, and we kind of hooked up in around 2009, and we used to fight a fair bit. We moved to Sydney together from the Gold Coast. We were both living on the Gold Coast, and we moved to Sydney together, and we were there for probably about 6 months, and I had a night where I was performing with by chance I did a gig with Robin Williams. And
wow,
yeah,
that is last night in Sydney. That mega gig that all the comedians talk about.
Yeah. It's on YouTube, and I was emceeing that gig, and we'd had some problems prior to that. There'd been a lot of fighting between us, and she put it down to my drinking, and so I was pulling that back. And that particular night, I drove us to that gig, and I had an amazing time, and Robin was fabulous, and that's a whole nother story in itself. But then at the end of the gig, we got a photo with Robin, blah, 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 we're hanging out. And the promoter gave me a light beer, and I was standing there, I was talking to Elijah Wood, who happened to be there as well, and I'm having a beer with this guy, and she's like, "We got to go." And I'm like, "No, the promoter's just given me this beer. I'm just having a chat with Elijah. But we'll go, but I just want to finish this beer." "No, we've got to go now. We've got to go now." And she was drunk. She stormed off and made a big scene. And then I left embarrassed, and then I drove home, and I went to the nearest pub, and I got blind, and then I went home and I kept drinking. And so by the time she got, I don't know where she went during the night, she came home around 1 o'clock, and now we're both drunk, and then this big fight starts, and then 5 a.m. The cops get called, the neighbours called the cops. As the fight's going on, I'm begging her to stop. She's calling me every name under the sun, and I'm saying, "Stop, please stop, don't, stop, please stop. And I grabbed her phone, and I remember I smashed it against my head. And it's awful. It's
not your most noble moment.
No, certainly not. And I definitely regret that. I smashed her phone against my head. She picked up my laptop. She smashed my laptop. Then she started smashing the apartment up, which was a furnished apartment, and that I was paying all the rent for, which is another thing about the relationship I might touch on a bit later, was that she didn't pay rent, she didn't work, and so we were paying for this luxury apartment in Sydney, and I'm paying it on my comedy wages, And so I grab her to stop her from smashing up the apartment. And as I say, I've kicked things off because I've smashed her phone against my head, which is a terrible thing.
And you were both drunk.
It's neither of our finest moments. But we fall into a wall, and we put a massive hole in the wall, and then we come out of that and we fall into another wall. And by that stage, then it's bang, 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 bang. This is the police. And the police came in. They separated us, as they do, and, tell us what happened. Okay, this is what happened. She told her story, I told mine. They took me to the watch house, so I went to Redfern Station. One of the kind of lighter moments of that very dark night, I guess, I don't know, the dark humour that you find in these situations was the cop was like, okay, in the official interview, he's like, I'm sitting in this cell and I'm like, oh my God, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And I'm like, just it's awful. It was the best night of my life that's now turned into the worst night of my life.
It's like, how did this
I'd never been arrested before. And anyway, so the cop says, so, how did this start? And I'm sobbing. I'm like, I'm like, I was with Robin, I did a gig with Robin Williams. And he's like, what? The Robin Williams? I'm like, yeah, the Robin Williams. And he's like, what's he doing here? I said, he's filming Happy Feet 2. And then he's kind of gone, hey, Stu, did you hear that? Stu, he just did a gig with Robin Williams. What, the Robin Williams? What's he doing here? What's he doing here again? Happy Feet. We both end up getting charged. To give you an idea of how that all played out was that we both went to court. Neither of us showed up against each other. I was acquitted. She was convicted. She had a bit. I went in by myself, into court by myself. She hired a celebrity lawyer that I won't mention. She had a very rich family. She got convicted, good behaviour bond and all that sort of stuff. Then we broke up immediately afterwards, obviously. She told her family what had happened because they had to hire this celebrity lawyer. And I had told my family what had happened and my friends and her friends, and everybody knew. And everybody said, you got to get out of this. And so we did. We got out of it. We broke up. And then we got back together. And
how long after?
It's hard to say. It's so long ago, but not long. A month max. Okay. Maybe 2 weeks. But straight, not long. Straight back in. And I told my family and my friends, and she didn't. And for the next, 8 years, about 9 years together, she kept me a secret. Maybe we were together for 6 months before that. I can't. It's hard to say.
So she never told her friends and family
that we were back together.
Yeah,
no. Oh, there was one period where she did. Maybe a 6 month period. I don't know, halfway through where she did, and then we broke up again. And then she
was worried about being judged.
Yeah, but it also became the carrot, and so that was and when I talk to people about it, like my therapist and things like that, that was the power imbalance, was that I had told all my friends, and I did take her to my gigs, and I took her to the comedy clubs, and she met all my friends, and she added all my friends on social media, but I wasn't allowed to be her friend on social media.
Very lopsided.
Yeah, and social media she would say, it's so lame that you care about this, and I'd be like, well, what? So why do you care so much that people know? We're together. We should be telling people. What
was her rationale? What would she say to you about her reasoning?
You show me that I can trust you, and you show me that we can have a good relationship, and then I'll get you back on. And I've described that as having, it's like, she's got her foot on my head underwater, or she's holding me underwater. The other analogy that I use is that I kept having to jump through hoops, and I never got a biscuit. The carrot, I never got the carrot. And I would tell her that's how she made me feel.
What was keeping you in the relationship at that point?
I thought I loved her, and I did. I can't describe it any other way. Like, I really loved her.
Had you fallen really in love with her in the beginning? Did you get that infatuation phase early on? Yeah.
I mean, I loved her as a kid. Like, she was the popular girl. She was the really hot popular girl at school, and had bad self-esteem, and I didn't.
So you sort of overvalued her in a way for a long time.
Yeah,
you put her up on a bit of a.
She had a lot of connections in the industry. And that was a big thing. Really good, connections, and I don't. And look, like we were talking about these toxic relationship terms. There was a lot of gaslighting. There was a lot of
emotional blackmail.
Emotional blackmail, big time.
Can you explain? Like, maybe we'll go through some of the elements of your toxic relationship, and then we'll come back to Rachel.
Sure.
After that, can you just explain some of the things that were going on?
So, she would do things like. Well, I mean, firstly, there was things like I walked in on her on my birthday in a bathroom with my best friend, or who at the time was one of my best friends. And both of them have told me conflicting stories over the years. There's another time where she came home and she told me a school friend of ours had hit on her. And I went crazy. I went, well, what do you mean? And then that story changed and he denied it and he still denies it. And she would say things like, especially in fights, your friends think you're a dickhead. They all hate you. Everybody thinks you're, this and that and the other thing. And I had to give her my password to my phone, but I wasn't allowed to know her password because I would go looking and she wouldn't go looking. And she didn't trust me, but I was supposed to trust her because she would never do anything like that. But she didn't want me to be privy to certain information. But she needed to know that. And so, it was this, you're on good, it was like, a good behaviour bond.
Yeah, constantly under surveillance.
Yeah, totally. And so she would find things on my phone that were from, before we were together, before we, we hadn't seen each other before we got together for, 20 years or whatever. So there was all this kind of, there was a lot of that sort of stuff, this whole keeping me a secret from everybody. I remember one time she made me literally hide in the bushes in Bondi one day. She saw a friend of hers. She goes, go. And, and I'm hiding in the bushes. What am I hiding in the bushes for?
That's such a visual low point, isn't it, when you're actually physically in a bush?
Literally in a bush.
Yeah.
I was literally in the bushes.
Yeah.
And why didn't she want this person to see you?
Because this person didn't like me. So that's the other thing is then she would bag me out to all of her friends and tell me that they didn't like me, tell me that her family didn't like me, tell me that her friends didn't like me. Yeah. And then... But if ever she found out that I'd said anything bad about her to anybody, even if we were broken up or whatever, then I'm the worst person in the world. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so this goes back to that night of that first domestic, where the police got involved, was that she never let me live down the fact that I had ratted on her. And that was the worst thing that I could have done.
But she still got back together with you.
She still got back together with me. And she also ratted on me. Now, then what would happen was that in fights, she would threaten to call the cops, or she would call the cops, and the cops would come and she would say that I had done this, that and the other, and then I would get taken to jail, and then I wouldn't say anything against her.
You're listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian with comedian Dave Eastgate and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. What are some of the things that you regret as well from the relationship?
Smashing her phone on my head, grabbing her that night, even in self-defense. Certainly the fighting and the yelling, particularly, more so, and being aggressive, and I threatened to kill myself a couple of times. That I understand is abuse.
It's blackmail, but it sounds like both of you just got into this very tragic and, ineffectual dynamic. But it sounds like there was, at some level that you may not have been conscious of at the time, there was a vulnerable part of you, like almost like the child part that was going, please love me, please see me, please validate me, please kind of help me feel like I'm okay. The fact that you kept letting the boundaries be transgressed. The fact that you kept giving
I kept jumping through the hoops.
Kept jumping through the
knowing
hoops.
I wasn't going to get a biscuit.
But it's really interesting as an adult to look into that, isn't it? And kind of go, why was I so seeking of and reliant upon her love and validation. You know, there's stuff there for you.
Oh, big time.
Right.
And that's all the stuff that I've explored, you know, in therapy and stuff afterwards.
Looking back on some of these stories that you've told, Dave, if you had the time machine and you could go back and do a do-over, what would you do differently if you had your time over?
It's hard to say. I guess the person I am now, I wouldn't put up with it from the get-go.
Yeah.
I've got really strict boundaries now that there's...
So you wouldn't have been there at all by that point?
I wouldn't have been there at all by that point.
What are examples of some boundaries that you've got now in relationships?
Name calling and yelling, basically. That's as far as we have to go. You call me a name and we're done. You yell at me and we're done.
I would love to say something at this point about the research on this exact topic,
Right.
and what we teach couples to do instead of that.
Right.
Is it okay if I
sure.
share
Yeah,
some of it?
please.
So I've been trained extensively in a method called the Gottman method of couples therapy, and some of the listeners may have heard of it because John and Julie Gottman have written lots of bestsellers, and they identified in their research the 4 relationship killers. The first 2 are not too bad, and the third one's really bad, and the fourth one's not great. The first one is criticism. So that's, nagging and criticising the other person instead of expressing what you're feeling and what you want. So that's the antidote to criticism. I feel, annoyed and frustrated because I need or because I want. Like this is how you kind of we teach them to talk like this instead of criticism.
As opposed to, you keep doing this, you keep doing that, you're doing this.
Yeah, you always, you're the one who...
You always.
You never.
Yeah. You always, you never. Yeah.
Always and never and should. And there's a whole lot of ways we hyper-criticise each other. And it leads to the second horseman of the apocalypse, because there's 4 of them. The second one is defensiveness. So this is all of us. If I get criticised, I feel defensive. We all do.
Yeah.
And we've got to learn to manage the defensive feelings so that it doesn't come out as defensiveness, because that's just counter-criticism.
Because sometimes we know when we're about to be criticised, we're like, oh, you've said, hey, can we have a talk? And it's just your defence mechanism kicks in immediately.
That's right. We're mammals after all, and we've got these amazing survival systems, so we all feel defensive. So we teach couples to self-soothe, so to manage what's called emotional flooding, which is literally, think of a road that's flooding. Our brain and body fill up with stress hormones and strong emotions, and then we can't think clearly, and then we don't act nobly. And this is all of us. So we teach couples or individuals to physiologically self-soothe, to regulate that defensive feeling so they don't get too flooded. And then we invite them to try and find some point of agreement. So if your partner says, oh, you forgot the milk again. I forgot the milk again. I did forget the milk again. Instead of, well, if you hadn't blah, 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 I wouldn't have forgot the milk. You know what I mean? It's just like, I forgot the milk. So sometimes you can agree with your partner's criticism if you just take it as a fact. The third one is the worst one, and it's called contempt, which is the opposite of respect.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there was tons of contempt.
Yeah.
So that's all the name calling. It's not just criticising their behaviour, it's putting the other person down and really denigrating them and making them feel terrible. So it's name calling, it's giving, dirty looks and sneers. And certainly physical aggression and violence is obviously an extreme form of contempt. And so that's the worst one, because that is what predicts misery or breaking up down the track. Relationships can tolerate some criticism and defensiveness, but contempt is the real killer. And the 4th horseman is stonewalling, and that's where we just, shut up shop, invisible stone wall, and we give the silent treatment.
Yeah.
And we don't speak to our partner at all, which feels like punishment from their side. And often we do that to just try and reduce the amount of conflict, but it actually makes it worse.
Yeah.
So we teach couples in relationship therapy to do the antidotes for those things, like build a culture of appreciation, scan and look for the good things, and take time out, but don't punish your partner through stonewalling. Now, this is really easy for me to say all this stuff out loud, but it takes a lot of practice.
Yeah. So unusual. Like, I learned more about the causes of the French Revolution than those 4 techniques, which are far more practical and useful.
And not just with your romantic partner, but with all relationships.
Yeah. It feels like it would require quite a bit of emotional intelligence to do that as well, that speaking and thinking.
Well, it does, and it requires self-awareness because you need to see when you're starting to get flooded and you need to think, uh-oh. You know, I say to my husband, I'm not fit for public consumption right now. I need to go to Bunnings. I'll be back when my nervous system has calmed down.
Yeah.
You need that self-awareness to see when you're getting defensive, to hear yourself when you're getting critical, so that hopefully you can avoid getting to contempt, which is criticism on steroids, and knowing when you need time out. You know, like, I can't speak about this right now. I just don't think it's going to be very constructive. Let's come back in half an hour. Because it takes about half an hour for your physiology to settle down once your stress hormones have been pumped.
Yeah.
So there's a whole science behind this. And you're right, we don't get taught any of this.
No.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with your experiences and relationships?
Oh, 100%. You know, COVID, weirdly enough, was the thing that really saved me because prior to COVID, I was living on the road. I took the summer off and then kind of COVID hit just as I was getting back into touring. So I took the summer off, and after a year of literally living on the road, I'd moved out of my apartment in Sydney and I'd really descended into hell. Like this post our breakup, and there was another breakup, and there was all this. I was drinking 30 units approximately a day, and what's a bottle of vodka is like 20 something, 22 maybe units. So it was like a bottle of spirits plus a day.
Your poor liver.
Oh yeah. I'm very lucky that my liver survived that, or that I survived. I got hit by a car one night, and I don't remember being hit by a car, but I definitely was hit by a car because I had all my money. My laptop was snapped in half. I had a gash on my head, I had a gash on my face. I broke my wrist. I had a gash up my leg. I had a gash on my arm. As I say, I had all my money, my phone, my laptop. I remember being at the pub, and I remember leaving the pub. But then I just woke up in my stairwell, covered in blood, with everything broken.
Was that a bit of like a rock bottom for you?
No.
Got worse.
Rock bottom is just a ledge, and all you have to do is roll over, and there's plenty further to fall if that's what you want. And no, rock bottom for me was in 2019, July 2019. I was in a hotel, and I was on the balcony of the hotel, and I was ready to go, and I'd reconciled with everybody in my life, and went, okay, that person can live without me. That person can live without me. They'll get over it. They'll get over it. They'll get over it. And I just kind of went through everybody, and I was ready to go. And it was my youngest niece that I couldn't do it to. I was like, and it was weird because the older niece, I was like, she's older now. She's going to be fine. She's a little bit more emotionally distant and whatever, but my youngest niece, it's going to kill her, and what it's going to do to her at this age. And I lost my uncle to drinking, and that was really traumatic for me, and I didn't want to do that's what saved me.
I've seen a lot of individuals and couples where there's been some domestic violence, and my training is to distinguish between 2 types of violence. One is called situational and one is called characterological. And it's even part of the comprehensive assessments that we do. So I've seen people's scores come up, on these assessments that we do with couples. And in 10 years of seeing couples and individuals, I reckon I've met maybe 1 or 2 people in all that time who I'm like, this is characterological domestic violence, as in this guy is a pit bull terrier.
Yeah.
He's going to be like this with every partner at some point.
Yeah.
Most of the time, what I've seen, and I think this fits with the research, it's called situational domestic violence, which is less lopsided. It's both people acting badly, which it was in your situation.
Hence toxic relationship.
Yeah, but it's both people not being conscious, not not having the emotional intelligence that you mentioned, the skills to do it different, and there's terrible chemistry, often between unconscious schemas, so belief systems surrounding unmet needs from earlier in life that you're not conscious of, but it dovetails terribly together. And then both of you act badly. You know, the cops get called and the cops try and figure out who's to blame. And, you know, like in the end, it was a situational thing. And yours just kept going and going on and just got terrible and landed you in the pits of hell. But it definitely sounds like it's the situational rather than the characterological.
Oh, of course it was.
So take some heart from that.
Yeah. And I'd never been in a relationship like that. I was diagnosed with PTSD, which is it's just below, I guess. Well, I shouldn't say below, but it's slightly different. You would know more about this, Rachel. But
what were you told?
I really don't know what it means, to be honest.
Well, you know, adjustment disorder, it's a combination of the two, really. You know, we normally think of and used to relegate the diagnosis of PTSD for people who'd been in car accidents or gone to war, but now we know we can be traumatised from toxic relationships. So this is relational trauma, or from being mistreated as a child, and that's developmental trauma. And so it affects our ability to adjust to difficult situations and cope with stress.
Some of it was developmental, from childhood trauma. There was certainly a lot of trauma from that relationship, and then the adjusting to that. And
because it puts you so beyond your coping resources, your ability to cope is so overwhelmed that then just you feel so bad, everything looks bad, and then you've got your bad coloured glasses on. And, you know, you can't cope with stress when you've got bad coloured glasses on because everything just looks so awful. One of the things I sometimes differentiate for clients is the difference between a problem and a predicament, because a predicament is something that you can't solve. You know, it's out of your control. You know, a predicament is, I love this person, but we just can't seem to make it work. You know, we have a really toxic dynamic and I have no reason to hope that it's going to get any better. It's a predicament because you have to just accept that it is the way it is, as opposed to a problem. You know, I've got a drinking problem, but I can do something about that. Yeah. And I think this is a really helpful distinction between our predicaments, which we need to accept, maybe let go of or manage or, you know, make peace with, and our problems, which we can solve. That's the control versus no control thing.
If you're in a toxic relationship with someone, when is it time to walk away and when is it time to try to fix it? Is there any guidelines you could give people?
That is like a $64,000 question. Yeah, my clients teach me about that stuff all the time. It's like sometimes they tell me, you know, one day I just knew. I was just clear. I'm done. I have no more hope left. Sometimes it just comes to people out of the blue. Other times they take a really good inventory, very conscious sort of pros and cons, and then they decide that, you know, they've tried as much as they can. They can put their hand on their heart and say, I tried, and I can walk away having tried. Everyone's got to work through that question for themselves.
Similar question for you, Dave, based on your personal experience and the therapy that you've gone through. What would you say to someone who's listening who might be in a toxic relationship?
It's really hard to get out of them. You end up becoming dependent on that toxicity because, and I learned this in therapy as well, if you've had a traumatic childhood, or even just in that relationship, it becomes love. That's what you understand that as love. Criticism, you know, yelling, fighting. You know, conflict is love. You're fighting because you love each other. If you make the conscious decision to leave this relationship because she's broken your boundaries, that is not a failed relationship. That is a successful. You've succeeded in sticking up for yourself,
honouring yourself,
and valuing yourself, and staying true to yourself.
Dave Eastgate and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam have been joining you for Help Me I'm a Comedian. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
If any of the topics that you've heard during Dave's interview have caused issues for you, if there's someone you'd like to talk to, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14.